Tell us what the difference is between networking and access and influence.
It's all about relationship building with no agenda. Networking, I think, by nature has a tendency to either be I'm asking for something, or I give you something, you give me something back. And I just think I want to build relationships with really cool people. That's how I view it. Access and influence is a subset of that. I think when your relationships are with people that have a lot of access and influence, your ability to do things increases with people that you know that have a lot of access and influence. It's just the way the world works.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long, or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. Here, there's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Loren has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
So just when I thought I knew pretty much all there was to know about networking, I bumped into this guy. His name is Scott MacGregor. He's our guest today. He's also the founder of the Outlier project. He's going to explain what that is. But when I bumped into Scott, I realized I had a lot to learn about networking. Because what's better than networking is access and influence. Because you can network all day and have coffee with everyone. And, you know, you can't see me now, but my coffee cup is bigger than my head. And networking also doesn't necessarily convert to things. And Scott's going to share a little bit more about access and influence. But what I really want you to get out of this conversation is a couple things. Number one, join his next cohort of Who's Your Oprah, because that's the class that I took, and that's where I learned all this good stuff. The second is go follow him, because this is an immediate way for you to jumpstart your network. And then the third thing is join us on the Outlier project, because it's part of a community that I'm a part of, and I've met incredible people, and it's run by incredible people. So that being said, welcome, Scott MacGregor. I'm so happy to have you, of all people, talk about access and influence.
Loren, my friend, I am tickled to be here. I'm so excited. So excited.
So do us a solid. Like, tell us, first of all, what the difference is between networking and access and influence, and why, even though networking might be embedded in all of those things, what is the kind of where the pedal meets the metal, the difference between networking versus access and influence, and why is this such a thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think networking has kind of a bad connotation to it, because I think it's tied to things that people perceive networking to be, which is you walk into a crowded room and you start passing out your business cards and giving your elevator pitch and all these things that are, you know, not really that fun and, you know, create anxiety and awkward situations. So I've just always been somebody who believes in building relationships. It's all about relationship building, and relationship building with no agenda. Networking, I think, by nature has a tendency to either be I'm asking for something, or it's a quid pro quo, and, you know, I give you something, you give me something back. And I just think I want to build relationships with really cool people. That's how I view it. Access and influence is a subset of that. I think when your relationships are with people that have a lot of access and influence, your ability to do things increases. So your ability to do good things in the world increases with people that you know that have a lot of access and influence. It's just the way the world works. So having an intentional program or strategy to do that is extremely important. And I would say most people, if not, and I'm probably being generous because I would say all people that I've met truly don't have a codified strategy for building high influence and high access relationships.
I was in that crowd, right? I was one of those people that loved, like you, love to build relationships, believe in building relationships, don't really look for much as, as that relationship is developing. That's not really where I'm coming from. But our audience, who are executives in the job search, many who have been out of their search for a long time, come and tell me, hey, my network is atrophied, right? Like I don't know, what to do. It's been a long time. I feel a little rusty. I don't really know where to go with this because I know that there's this thing called the hidden job market, which is access through people. But if I've been out for so long, how do I get back in and do it in a way that doesn't feel all icky and transactional and spammy? And so one of the things that I wanted to jump to, because I think it was such a light bulb moment for me, in fact, it was more like a blinding light moment, is this notion that you talk about where it's the effort over the outcome. In other words, it's not necessarily about the big win of the outcome, and you coupled that by talking about being a one of one. So can you please enlighten us so everyone else here can have those light bulb moments?
Yeah, so effort and outcome are two very different things. Typically, people are very, very focused on the outcome, and they don't realize necessarily that people really appreciate the effort, and it doesn't necessarily have to have the positive outcome. But when people know that you're working on their behalf and you're advocating for them and you're in their corner, that's very meaningful. If it has a positive outcome, that's fantastic. But even if it doesn't, I think people understand that effort means something and it's meaningful. And I think sometimes we get too hyper focused on, did I get the sale? Was I able to accomplish the goal? And, in the world of building relationships, I think people really do very much value the fact that you've put in a Herculean effort to help them try to achieve a goal. And whether that happens and comes to fruition or not is less important than people think.
It's probably going to be very difficult for you to unwind this for a moment because it's so innate and natural to you. But can you give us a couple of examples where maybe it's in a job search, maybe it's just business to business, maybe it's friend to friend, who cares, right? It doesn't really matter the context of the relationship. Can you give an example of just like daily efforts that we could be taking to move that needle and start cultivating those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a real world example. I have a very good friend. Her name's Heather Monahan, and she has written 2 bestsellers. She's a top 50 keynote speaker in the world. She's got a top podcast. And, we're very, very close friends. And she really wanted to be on Lewis Howes' podcast, which is, top 10 in the world. So as accomplished as Heather is, it's really, really hard to get on Lewis's podcast, School of Greatness. So I wouldn't characterize my relationship with Lewis as we're not bosom buddies, but we know each other. And so I have, made the effort on her behalf to advocate for her with Lewis. And it's a great example of, it hasn't happened yet. I think it will happen at some point, but it hasn't happened yet. But she's seen the effort that I've made over the years to consistently advocate when I have an opportunity to have an interaction with Lewis and see if I can make that happen, because I think it's a benefit for both of them. So that's just a real world example, right, where my relationship with Heather has been enhanced, I'm sure, because she's seen the effort, the outcome, meaning her actually getting on Lewis's School of Greatness podcast hasn't happened, but I don't think that really matters.
Right. And so in this case, your effort was an intro. We can all make intros. We can all make intros. And I really encourage people, when they are networking, please don't show up without having one or two, even prepared in advance, because you know who you're going to be meeting. You might have a little bit more intel around them. And that's an easy way to also come there so that that relationship has a follow-up thread, right? Because then once that person has met, chances are you're going to have additional things to talk about, so it doesn't go dead-ended.
But as you know, the important thing about making good strategic connections is making sure that there's mutual benefit. And oftentimes people are very mismatched in those introductions, and it's a win for one person, but it's really not a win for the other. And that creates a lot of issues. So I think you really need to be very, very intentional and very much, and Lewis and Heather is a good example. I truly believe that that's a win for both. And if it wasn't, it's not something that I would try to do.
So would you decline it? Would you decline Heather and say, you know what, like, I don't really think it's a match? How would that go down?
Yeah, I would have a conversation. I get asked on a fairly regular basis because of some of the folks that I know, will you introduce me to so-and-so? And if there's not a clear agenda and I don't feel like there's a win for that other person, then, I will just politely explain that. And I think of it as my political capital, or my chits that I have with that person that I have a relationship with. And if I'm going to make an introduction and potentially cash some of those in, I need to make sure that that's a really good investment. And if it's going to take a bunch of those chits away and it's not going to be beneficial, it actually could be very damaging to the relationship.
So I really want to kind of like, again, with the spotlight here, because most people, when they're in a job search, they think, number one, if you're connected with them on LinkedIn, then you just for some reason know them and can make this referral or introduction. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. So you definitely want to ask and make no assumptions. And third of all, you got to consider that person and how much political capital they've been accumulating. Because in the case like Heather Monahan, you said in your example, you've been building that for a long time. For you, doing this favor for her is a pleasure. It's not like something that's going to, grind your gears. And I'm sure that it works reciprocally. But what I really want to also take this to is this question that comes up all the time. And I even had it in your course, which was, when do you make the ask? At what point in the relationship are you on kind of, and of course it's going to vary, person to person, but at what point does it become something that is earned?
Yeah, I never really think of making the ask, because I go into building a relationship with no intention of ever making an ask. It may come up where there could be something that would be beneficial, in which case there is. And I just make sure that the scale is balanced way, way, way in my favor. But what typically happens is when you've poured into somebody else, when you've been a resource to them over and over and over again and never asked for anything, what happens 9 times out of 10 is that person is so grateful, and you've built such a strong relationship because they know that you're not looking for anything, that they're actually going to come to you and say, hey, Loren, I appreciate you so much. What can I do for you? So I rarely have to ask anybody for anything. They're typically going to say, hey, Scott, what can I do for you? And oftentimes, like, you also need to allow them at times to do things for you because it feels good for them. Like, they want to give back because you've been so generous with either your time, your treasure, or your talent. So, I think you've got to make sure that the scales are tipped well in your favor if you're going to ask for anything, and make sure that you've poured into that person so that it's an appropriate ask.
So one of the things I really, really loved is, you're talking about pouring into this person, and in your Who's Your Oprah class, this isn't for every single person in your whole entire network, because that's not the way that this is working. So definitely, I will make sure that there's a link in there. You want to learn how to do this, especially if you're an executive, because those relationships and selecting those relationships is a big deal, and makes a huge difference, because we all only have so much bandwidth, and there's relationships that really, really are your key areas of connection, right? It's not based on what that person
who changes your life, and you are often one person away, one relationship away from completely changing the trajectory of your life. And it's happened over and over and over again through the course of time, where, I think of, my friend Candace Nelson and her interactions with Oprah literally changed her life. And you're one relationship away from changing everything.
So I wanted to also move over to this subtle but powerful way that you can also drive the build of those relationships through access and influence. And one of the themes that came up that I love, I really love this, is looking for opportunities versus occasions. Opportunities versus occasions. Can you explain what that means in like real term, and how we might be able to think about that in our relationships and network?
Sure. Opportunities present themselves at indiscriminate times. Occasions are what people typically focus on. And let me give you an example. When do you get the most cards and things sent in the mail? Birthdays, holidays, things like that. So it's hard to stand out in those situations. So, when every corporation is sending out their holiday cards, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying you're in a sea of other people doing the exact same thing, rather than maybe in July sending a note to your client saying how much you appreciate their business. That's going to be very different. But looking for opportunities versus occasions, can play out a number of different ways. I think it's just paying attention to what's happening in the world. So, I'll give you a real world example. Merrill Hodge is a very good friend of mine, was an iconic player for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Chicago Bears, and then had 20 years on ESPN. And, his good friend Chris Mortensen from ESPN had passed away. And I know that Merrill was very close to him. So, that was an opportunity to send condolences. He wasn't a family member of Merrill's. And, so sending a sympathy card and letting Merrill know that I was thinking of him at a time that I'm sure was tough, was an opportunity to just strengthen our relationship. And if you're only interacting with people at the times that you're expected kind of to interact with them on their birthday, on an anniversary, during a holiday, then it goes back to a question that I don't think we actually went into, which is this concept of one of one, which is really important. It's when you're doing something for somebody, you have to say, am I one of 1,000 people doing this? Which is a good example of the holiday cards. When you're sending a holiday card out at, the end of the year or even Thanksgiving, you're there's a thundering herd of people that you're competing with. So you're one of whatever, hundreds, thousands. If you are just liking somebody's post, you may be one of hundreds or thousands of people that are doing that. If you send a thoughtful gift to somebody, or you write a review, you are one of, when you look at Amazon reviews of books, there are not thousands of people that have written reviews. So even looking at somebody's LinkedIn recommendations, you may see somebody that has tens of thousands of followers, but has 10 or 15 people that have written them a recommendation. So think of that. You've got tens of thousands of followers, but of those tens of thousands of followers, only 10 or 15 have taken the time to write them a recommendation. So now you're one of a very, very small group. So I think when you think about building relationships, getting as close to one of one as you possibly can is really where things change, because that's where you become unique. And, in your world, in the job market, you want to be one of one. You want to be the candidate that everyone obviously is unique. But at the end of the day, if you can't demonstrate how you are truly different and you are one of one, it's hard to get selected, because people don't do a good job of that, explaining why they are unique and why they are valuable. And then they become just one of a thundering herd, especially in today's job market, who are trying to land that coveted job.
100%. So one of one also, and you touched about it, it is differentiating yourself, of course, on branding, but there are things that you can do. Write a review is one of the ones that you talked about, but I want to take this to the gifting thread here. And I want to also disclaimer this, or put a little caveat around it, and says, hey, by the way, we are not asking you to go shell out beaucoup bucks to go like slather people with a bunch of luxurious gifts. Maybe at some point that's part of this, but I really would love for you to talk about the ways that you can give gifts in a very economical, maybe even no cost way, that are like winner chicken dinner, like the way to be one of one.
Sure. The first thing that anybody should do is go buy a buddy of mine. His name's John Rulin. Go buy his book. It's called Giftology. You will learn everything about the power of gifting. And what you will find is that gifting does not mean you're buying people a Rolex. In many cases, John is a big proponent of, saying it's not the thought that counts, it's the thoughtful thought that counts. And often the thoughtful thought is not something that costs a lot of money. It's just being cognizant of what might be important to them. So an example, I was in the post office, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I saw these stamps of the women's national soccer team. And it was very cool artwork, and I had never seen them before. And I happened to be friends with a bunch of people, actually two, which 25 years ago yesterday, and we're recording this on July 11th. So on July 10th, Brandy Chastain scored a goal that literally not only changed women's soccer, but changed women's sports. And another friend of mine, Christine Lilly, was also a very prominent part of that team. And then I have other friends that are on the women's national team, like Joe Lohman, et cetera. And so I saw these stamps and I thought, oh, these are really cool. So I bought a book of stamps for each of them. And, you know, maybe it was $15 or something like that. And some stationery, and sent them to them and said, hey, next time you write a handwritten note to somebody, you know, you'll probably enjoy using this as a stamp rather than, you know, whatever generic stamp you've been using. And the feedback that I got from these are people that are, you know, they're very, very accomplished and, you know, they've done amazing things. And, you know, it was a whatever $20 gift, but you would have thought, you know, I bought them a Mercedes. It was the reception from that gift was tremendous. So that's an example of a thoughtful thought and something that really doesn't cost a lot of money. You know, finding a book that's appropriate for maybe one of their children and having the author sign it, you know, that's probably a $15, $20 investment. But that'll go a lot further than the steak dinner or the round of golf or the Broadway tickets or, you know, whatever it is, because it's unique and it's thoughtful and it's very specific to them.
One of the expressions that I heard you say in this, in our Who's Your Oprah class that still is resonating with me. I mean, I was like in tears when you said it. It puts $1 million in your heart.
It does.
Right? You're putting that $1 million in their heart and in your heart, because that connection to meet them where they are. I know that's kind of cliche, but to see them where they are is even better, to know what will light them up. And I know that, you know, kind of an additional layer to this is something that you taught me, which is use your phone as a CRM and grab the names of their kids and their dogs, their cats, whatever is going on with them. And just use this as a way. Yeah. And you made this point too, right? Like, okay, like, you know, we could use an Excel spreadsheet, but this is with you like 24/7. And also it just makes it more turnkey for you to keep these things top of mind. So I just thought that was genius. And actually I've been doing that even more. I just did something last week and that was really exciting for me.
It's fun to see somebody light up when, you know, you mention the name of their dog, sibling, you know, spouse, child, whatever. Even I've noticed when I mention somebody's alma mater, they're almost shocked that, wow, you know where I went to school. And I mean, it's literally as simple as, you know, going on LinkedIn and in 2 seconds, you know that. But I think a lot of people just don't put the time and effort in to truly get to know people and know about the things that they truly care about, which is family and friends and pets and things that are really, really near and dear to most people's hearts.
I want to thank you, Scott MacGregor. You've been a great gift to me. You're a great gift to our community, and I love being an outlier. Can you please tell people about the Outlier Project? What is TOP and who should come and join?
Yeah, I think anybody who thinks a little bit differently, who wants to take that road less traveled, which I would say is where all success is. It's definitely not following the thundering herd. It's kind of being a contrarian. So we're believers we have a saying that anybody can be ordinary, but we all have the power to choose to be extraordinary. And we don't tell people, I don't say to anybody, Loren, this is your definition of an extraordinary life. But I want to make sure, and as a community, we want to make sure that people don't sleepwalk through life, that people make that dash between the dates meaningful, and that they live their version of an extraordinary life. And so for me, that's a life of impact. For other people, it might be a little bit different. And that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just at the end of the day, we only get one at bat. And to sleepwalk through life is doing a disservice to ourselves, to those around us, to our colleagues, to our family, to our friends. We need to maximize this time that we have. And living an extraordinary life, a lot of that is who you surround yourself with, how you get your nourishment, meaning your learning and development opportunities. And there are lots of ways that you can do that. You can read books, you can listen to great podcasts like this. Everything we do is live and interactive. So we love to give people the opportunity to not only hear from very prominent people, but to actually talk to them and build relationships. And that's what we do in the Outlier Project. We're about 750 members and growing very quickly in 34 different countries. The most fun that I've ever had in 30 years of business is definitely the Outlier Project. It just feeds my soul because it's great to see people supporting each other. That I would say all are not like-minded, but are all like-hearted. And that's important. I think we as a community are like-hearted, but we're not like-minded. Everybody thinks a little bit differently, and that's embraced in our community because we are all outliers. So we all have different ways of thinking about things and approaching things. And I think that's where all the learning comes from. And because it's a unique, diverse, eclectic group of people, you tend to learn an awful lot because people have very different thoughts on different ways to, you name it, take care of your health and wellness, or grow your career, or take care of your finances, or build relationships, you name it.
Thank you again. And we will also see all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We won't see you, but we'll be here next week. In the meantime, huge appreciation to you, Scott. And also, if you like this podcast, which we hope you do, please go ahead and write us a review and follow us, subscribe. You are so important to us in helping us grow. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next career blast in a half. Most of all, thank you for you.